Hey everyone, good morning. Glad to have everyone here, and I'm excited to have our panelists come up. I'm gonna just do a quick round of intros for myself, then we'll get to know who they are really quickly, and then 60 seconds about what they can do for you, and then we'll dive into smart networks, IoT, adoption, and how do we accelerate that. So, good morning, I'm Jonathan Van, VP of Business Development at Element 8, where we're a next generation ISP. Our team previously built the #1 and #3 private fixed wireless providers in the United States. And in that process, we connected millions of consumers to the internet, bought and integrated more than 100 companies, and connected millions of consumers with the government and deployed their networks. My background is in early stage technology commercialization, having worked with intellectual property, venture capitalists, and most importantly, technologists and visionary CEOs. And I'm excited to explore how we bring smart networks and IoT to scale that reaches hundreds of millions of everyday consumers. So I'm joined by my panelists. First, Ryan Gerbrandt, COO of Anterix. Ryan joined the company as Chief Operating Officer in March 2020, where he oversees Anterix sales, product development, marketing, operations, technology, and engineering efforts. And prior to Anterix, he served 13 years at Trilliant, where he pioneered their smart grid deployments efforts as managing director of their global industrial Internet of Things and smart cities business. Next, he's joined by Ghoshal, VP and head of utilities at industrials at Ericsson, where he brings over 30 years of experience in the utilities, telecom, and mission critical industrial verticals. And he's been increasingly engaged in the evolving confluence between electrical power, telecommunications, and electrification of transportation. Next, we have Brian Snider, CEO and founder of Lit Communities, where he's responsible for overseeing overall business, ensuring resources are in place to meet the needs of company staff, investors, and communities. He founded the company in 2019 after more than 18 years of experience in wide area network deployments, including the Southeast US build out of AT&T's UVerse release, Google Fiber's build in Austin, Salt Lake City, and Verizon's network densification in Seattle and San Francisco. Next, we have John Shubin, Director of Sales at ADRF, in charge of driving sales revenue from wireless service providers, system integrators, enterprise customers throughout the United States, and he was previous Director of Business Development and has 20 years of experience on the front lines of the wireless industry. Thank you. And last but not least, we have Tim Kipley, Chief Customer Officer at EveryNet. Tim is the Chief Customer Officer at EveryNet and responsible for global network build-outs, operations, and customer success, and his team works in all geographic regions to assist enterprise cities and governments to enable lower WAN connectivity in their large-scale IoT projects. I am going to get to the end of this panel, and we're going to spend 60 seconds learning about what they do, and we could start with the end of the line.
Does this work? Can everybody hear me? Cool. My name is Brian Snider. I'm the CEO of Lit. We spent a lot of time building as a contractor large networks in a lot of urban areas. About 8 years, basically saw the tier 2 cities and beyonds were being overlooked. Once fiber started to be deployed, everybody went to the bigger cities. So we wanted to build out a unique model to figure out ways to do it with the tier 2 cities and beyond. And so in 2019, we created Lit Communities. We partner with municipalities to first take them through a consulting process to really give them a roadmap for how they can build out a proper connected broadband network. From there, we'll also work with them all the way through to setting up a local ISP, to anything basically that they need. But our overall big plan is to create a smart city, and the underlying first need is connectivity to the homes, connectivity to the businesses, but then that underlying infrastructure can create all the cool things and turn the world into the Jetsons if we wanted to, I guess. Thanks.
Excellent. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you to Andres and the Digital 360 folks for having us collected here today. As our president and CEO just said, I'm Ryan Gerbrandt. I'm with Anterix, the Chief Operating Officer. And we're focused on the evolution and the role that broadband wireless communications can play in our critical infrastructure space, and laser focused on finding the synergies and really connecting to some of the most urgent national issues around the evolution of our electric space, facing some of the environmental realities, and the necessity to bring information, communications, visualization to the grid, in addition to really trying to support and drive the evolution of the role that data plays in the utilities migration towards digitization, and just how critical and fundamental it is to be able to have that kind of information control and visibility as, at the end of the day, almost any solution that we're going to see, being adopted in terms of utilities' roles, and as they're pursuing one of these primary opportunities, it's going to be inherently digital. It's a connected asset. It's a source of information. It's a control point, and it's really driven the ongoing need and the priority that we're starting to see utilities really face on, adding the wireless side of communications to their legacy systems of wired and fiber optic networks, where it can be very complementary to them and their role. I'm so excited to be able to speak with you here today.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate again the invitation to sit amongst you and have this conversation. Having spent over 3 decades in the power industry or in the utilities industry, I've never been as excited. There was one more occasion almost 2 decades ago when we started to talk about smart meters. That's when communications was such an important topic. And it is here again, 2 decades later. This is another point of inflection for this industry. I think everything what you heard earlier from Rob around air gapping of the industry from bad actors, increasing reliability of the grid, resiliency of the grid, Morgan's favorite word, synchrophasers. We're going to get there. My role, I don't think anybody needs introduction to Ericsson. We have been leaders in the telecommunications and the wireless communication space for a very, very long time. And now it is absolutely, stupendous that we're taking that knowledge, that technology leadership, the thought leadership, from having deployed such mission-critical networks for the carriers, the mobile operators, and repurposing that for the utilities industry, for the power industry. We're calling it private networks. You can call it anything you like. And that's kind of what I do and have a lot of fun doing it.
Awesome. Thank you. Brian?
John Shubin with Advanced RF Technologies. So we're a leading OEM in the distributed antenna space. Initial focus was on cellular, working with all the carriers. Then from there, we took it to the public safety side, making sure that buildings are safe. Today's buildings are, as you know, LEED certified. Not a good friend of radio frequency. RF does not go inside these buildings. So we manufacture equipment that helps the first responders communicate in the buildings. One case study that we recently did was the Mandalay Bay, largest mass shooting in U.S. history, 4.5, almost 5 years ago. First responders could not communicate when they had an active shooter. So now, like Clark County drew that hard line in the sand. So now from a public safety perspective, they're making sure that all the buildings are compliant. And now, in addition to the cellular side, working with the carriers, we are an Anterix, big fan of Anterix as well. We are one of their ecosystem partners. And so private LTE is huge. So we work with a lot of developers, property owners, things like that to bring private LTE inside buildings, because that tenant and resident experience is just about as important as making that building smarter. So thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, nice to be up here with this distinguished panel. My name is Tim Kipley with Everynet, and Everynet builds globally nationwide LoRaWAN networks. And there's a ton of talk of all these different technologies. They all perfectly have their space. And where LoRaWAN fits is more of the longer range, very low data rate, battery-powered type of devices. So there's some needs in the grid. There's some needs for moving assets around the U.S. or different countries. And we operate in a model where we're a neutral host, to where we'll go put up coverage in a country and make that coverage available for any company out there that wants it. So there's resellers, as an example, that will take it, bundle it up for a utility and provide that connectivity for that city or that area where they want that connectivity. So, yep, that's it.
Awesome. So the topic of conversation this morning so far has been about the next inflection point. We're all here because over the last few years, we've seen the importance of connectivity, data, and how that affects our everyday utilities. Would love to find out from this panel what you've seen are commonalities in the early adopters, and let's start with Brian. What about, say, like tier 2 cities that you're working with, the first people that are your customers or that have shown interest, what do you see that they have in common, and maybe how do we profile? Maybe some people in the room have this profile already.
So that's a really good question, because you have to have folks that think outside the box, and with broadband, it's just bigger than internet now, and we find most municipalities or counties that we work with, if it's driven from an economic development standpoint, we're able to move a lot faster, because the value in what the broadband network can bring in on a whole, again, is much bigger than internet, especially if you partner with the right group. And so those cities have been much more open to partner, and we're working in Medina County, Ohio, where we set up Medina Fiber as a network. We've got 1,200 customers connected today. We started out really wanting to prove our model within two villages. One only had 500 homes and one only had 1,200 homes. And we're still able, with our partnership with the county, to make the cost per household pass fit into a private equity investment. And we can continue to do that no matter how rural we are. Now, geography sometimes is going to cause challenges where we have to do things wirelessly. It is what it is in those scenarios, unfortunately. But we're also working with Brownsville, Texas here, which is, we're really excited about that project. It's just getting kicked off, where the city of Brownsville will be building out a middle mile network that we've created a local ISP there called BTX Fiber, and we'll be connecting all the homes and businesses, and then wanting to take some of the tests that are being done at Texas State and implement them into Brownsville. Would be a perfect scenario to do that. And then the other one we're starting right now is in New York County, Pennsylvania, and that is the common thread with all of them. It was all economic development. It was folks that were willing to take kind of a leap of faith and building the network in their own hands, because the incumbents weren't doing it.
Very nice. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to. Let me approach this a little bit from kind of what we're seeing across the nation's utilities, because it really drives the commonality of what sparks this conversation with utilities and the focus on the role of broadband. Rob earlier put in perspective of the not-so-perfect storm. Bringing that into perspective, though, kind of what we're seeing, Koustuv mentioned on it too, in terms of what we've seen as an industry, in terms of innovation and what's driven the impetus for change, the evolution of the role of technology and the different applications that can and should fundamentally change the way that we design, we operate, and we maintain the networks of our nation's utilities. The environmental reality, is severe. We've certainly seen it now, in terms of the impacts to the California droughts, which create really the seeds of, what have been some enormous wildfires, over the last decades. And, that while the scenario is unique in California, the environmental impacts that we're seeing across the nation, unfortunately, are not. Whether it's disastrous hurricane coming in through the south, or it's an ice storm like we've seen here in Texas. We've seen the same things run up and down the East Coast. And I saw a recent piece of information that said over the last couple of decades, utilities outages have more than doubled in the last couple of decades. And a large part of that is a function of what we've seen in terms of the new environmental norms that we're all operating in. And that changes the design characteristics. I think of the environmental specifications as being a set of requirements that we've designed the nation's grid for, and that's the wires, the generators, the communication systems, the end devices. And those norms, are fundamentally different today. The ability to rethink the architecture of the grid, and bring resilience in now, through the use of advanced technologies and tools, is a fundamental change in terms of the way utilities have to think about rebuilding and architecting for the future of the grid, and our ability to increase its capabilities to be resilient and capable. You couple with that, kind of the clean energy transformation, decarbonization, and a lot of that carries through, what are described as distributed energy resources. And what that means to the grid is really a transformation from, the singular flow nature that we've all seen and probably understand the grid to operate today, where you've got a mega generator, whether it's nuclear, hydroelectric, possibly coal or gas, generating the bulk of the base power for the grid, and the energy, the electrons is basically flowing one way down to us as consumers. Everything about the architecture of the grid, which was built, more than 100 years ago, was really based around that fundamental principle. Start putting now little micro generators in, whether it's in solar on all of our homes, or the potential future of having a connected electric vehicle that can both be a consumer of electricity and also a potential provider of electricity. And you've got a much more complex dynamic around what the ability is for us to build, control, and operate that modern grid. That's a dramatic change, and it has a significant impact on utilities as they're trying to face that new reality and think about the clean energy transformation in and around that path. Cyber further compounds it. The ability to do that and provide digital technologies while enhancing, not just maintaining, but enhancing the capabilities of the communication system is to be able to secure and protect all of that equipment. And frankly, for the first time now in a couple generations, with the plethora of EVs starting to come in, I think we're also starting to see a forecast of load increase. As a utility industry, we've seen load decline, for the past several decades, where we're going to start seeing more demand for electricity, more importance on our everyday lives in terms of the implications of electricity, and how we ultimately use it as consumers. So what does that all mean? It's a rate of change that's been unprecedented, in terms of what I've seen in my career, in the utility industry. A dramatic amount of opportunities that utilities need to face, in terms of how they put the systems together. But at the heart of all of these, is digital equipment.
Developers out there, some of the large ones, Crescent Heights related, et cetera. Proper planning up front, right? Like I mentioned, these buildings, they're not friendly for radio frequency, so making sure that they have the right tech stack installed into the building to make sure that it's going to cover what's used today as well as what's coming tomorrow. When you walk into some of these Class A properties, first thing that the residents and tenants do is they take a look at this. Is this going to work? Otherwise, they're not going to be signing leases. So it's really about that tenant and resident experience, but more importantly, from a building perspective, the owners are looking at private LTE to manage the property to help that tenant experience. So they all have the apps on they all have the apps for the tenants and residents. So what does that look like for the tenants? So when Robert pulls up to the high rise in his Porsche, it automatically recognizes he's got the app on his phone, nothing needed, no fob, gate opens, he pulls into the parking structure. When he pulls into his parking spot, IoT sensors trigger, Robert's here, let's get his unit ready for me, like it's 70 degrees, things like that. And then this is his credential, walking through the common areas. When you walk through these, especially multifamily high rises now, when you walk through them, obviously there was a thing called COVID, and that kind of affected the way people are working. More people are working remotely, and I'll tell you, when you walk through these new high-rises on the multifamily side, it doesn't look like an apartment complex. It has working stations all over the place. It really has like a mixed-use vibe to it, and so the phone is the credential going through the common areas, the destination elevators, things like even one swipe opens the unit door. And then the property owners take it another step further. Everything's tied together with the private LTE networks. They're taking a look at data analytics. Everything's tied in with the wireless access control system, 4K video surveillance, HVAC, you name it. It's all tied together. So if Robert gets up to the third floor, says, you know what, I want to go take a look at the rooftop lounge tonight. I'm new in town, want to meet some people. But guess what? He could take a look at the phone, open up the app, tell them how many people are on that rooftop lounge. Not who's there, but because it's tied to the wireless access control system, how many people are up there. Same with the gym. If he wants to go work out, he can tell if the gym is crowded or not. Things like that. So, in addition to just that overall tenant experience, they're really looking forward, to making sure that building is smart. Our equipment was installed in a high-rise in Chicago recently, which is recognized as the smartest building in Chicago. And it all started with making sure that the foundation of that tech stack is very future-friendly. So, and private LTE, like I know we're talking about the utility space a lot today, and a lot of railroad applications, but I think that the opportunity for in-building stuff with private LTE is going to be huge as well. You'll hear buzzwords like CBRS. CBRS is private LTE as well. A lot of moving parts to it. It's really moved slow. 4 years ago when that was introduced, I thought it was going to be extremely popular, but it's moved at the speed of government. I'll just say that, and so. There's so many moving parts to it. It's very difficult to deploy. So we're starting to see a lot of a lot of property owners and developers looking at other options. So yeah, we're definitely excited about 700 private LTE with Anterix as well. So
from an adoption perspective, what have you seen has been like the biggest hesitation, and like what's the mix between new builds or retrofits?
Well, the good news is we're starting to see more and more education. A lot of the developers nowadays are becoming way more well-versed in technology than they used to be. Wireless, this used to be a nice to have inside a building, but now it is a must have, and that's just from the tenant experience. But now, from the property owner developer, to manage that building, they know. So the good news is they're educating themselves. We've seen time and time again, with our systems deployed in some of these high rises, first thing they'll ask, okay, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, yep, covered. Okay, what about private LTE? What are the options? So the good news is for new builds, a lot of these developers, they're doing their homework, and they're mentioning private LTE to us, which is exciting.
Very cool. Tim?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, going back to the commonalities that we see out in the market right now is I think most of our customers have done the basic math, and they can see, hey, if I digitize this asset, or if I digitize my meters or street lights or whatever it may be, they can see there's a cost benefit out there, and they can see it, hey, if I can make this project happen in the next 12 months, I can save this much money. Where we tend to see the problem is that there's a lot of decisions out there to be made, and that's why we're supporting Cedar so much, is that we believe that these cities and enterprises and entities really, they need a spot where they can look at their exact requirements versus what is available on the market. And there's tons of technologies out here. Most of them work very well together. And as we're talking about distributed antenna systems, I mean, all of these things are absolutely needed to get coverage for these digital assets wherever they may be. And I think really the biggest commonality is that it can be confusing for these customers. Do I go private LTE? Do I use LoRaWAN? Do I use some proprietary RF? And there just really needs to be a space where they can go and talk to some experts, talk to some universities, and say, what do you think would work best for the city of Austin or the city of Brownsville or Cedar Park or wherever it may be, and be able to put their hands on things, be able to really look at it and then decide. Because once it is an undertaking for these cities, it's a big project. They're really big projects to put up coverage over these large geographic areas.
Thank you. So maybe this is a question for the entire panel, but because we're in it every day, what has been maybe a model you've seen that you say, everyone should know about this use case, this cost-benefit analysis, and it just should go nationwide? Is there like a glimmer or a project you'd say, if it can happen here in this city or this town for 1,000 customers or this utility, it should happen for everyone? And maybe what's the gap? What's missing? Maybe it's a vendor, maybe it's a distributor, integrator. What have you seen been the biggest gap perhaps in the adoption? Feel free to whoever's got the tip of their tongue.
Sure, I'll take a crack at it. What we are seeing evolving, I would say, is potential partnerships between the power sector and the communities, call it the municipalities or the municipal infrastructure, if you will. For example, capital is at a premium as it comes to municipalities. You have to issue bonds and things like that to build anything. Utilities, on the other hand, are very, very, they can suck up as much capital as you can throw at them, right? And so why not leverage that vertical infrastructure that the utilities are going to be building anyway for their private usage for their grid ecosystem, if you will. But surrounding, at the edge of each of these utilities, there are communities that are hungry for broadband. So dual usage of such vertical infrastructure is certainly showing up in a big way. I mean, I'm from Dallas. I mean, I see it myself. I mean, serving the city of Dallas, we're seeing use cases such as gunshot sound or noise detection systems, particulates, environmental particulates detection systems on the street, city lights, if you will. Those are kinds of the things that we're starting to see, not just in Dallas, but in other parts in California as well. We have started to see that.
Excellent. Have you seen how have maybe perhaps it's the education gap on these new public-private partnership models? What have you seen as the commonality for people in cities who are open to something like that?
There is a lot of education required, is all I can say.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. It's in its stages of infancy, because the two industries don't understand each other. One's a very, very highly regulated industry, very much governed and ruled by the state public utility commissions, while the other, call it the municipal communities or the rural cooperative communities, they operate at a slightly different set of infrastructure and economics.
Makes sense. Brian, what have you seen from the cities and economic development offices that want to ingest the new open access model?
Yeah, I think it gives municipalities that are in states where there are regulations where they can't be the provider, they can still build the infrastructure and then allow a private company to provide service across it. So, and I agree. I think public-private partnerships, they've been discussed, and certain ones have been successful, certain ones haven't. A lot of that has to do with the partner that you select and part of that public-private partnership. And when we do work with municipalities and even with the economic development groups, when we want to give them a roadmap at the end of the day. They need a business plan to go execute this because, again, they're stepping into something that's new for them. So during our consulting process, that is the education process. We tell them what they have in their community, what they don't have, where their gaps are. We survey all the residents. We create a detailed financial model for here's how the network's going to cost. We show them how they can do different business plans where the municipality can bring in money. The biggest difference now is municipalities have the money to do it.
Yeah.
It used to be, it had to go to vote, it had to be a bond. Our model, we believe the municipality should own a portion of the network and they should connect their anchor institutes. It's the backbone of their city. They're able to protect to where gunshot recognition software is working when it needs to be. And then from that standpoint on, based on the model and what the ultimately business plan says, let's figure out a way then to get deeper within the municipality. Because once we're deep and we're close to the home, not only can we provide internet service to the home, but we can also provide smart city applications all throughout the community. And so from that side, I really think public-private partnerships we're about to see them at a level we've never seen before. And you're seeing even companies that you would never think would get in that space are actually doing it now. So I do think that's going to be one of the better models going forward. But it is complicated, and if you find the right partners, though, it can be done the right way. And it has to be a very, very tight partnership.
Right. Especially with the way the funds are being distributed now, how have y'all looked at approaching these public-private partnerships? Who's leading? Who's signing up for the funds? And how do you actually accelerate? Because we have billions of dollars flowing, supposedly. Then how do you actually access those dollars with community leaders? How have y'all approached it? Maybe with the utility or in partnership with the municipality for Anterix?
Yeah, I can start. I mean,
sure.
We have an entire grant services team on our side where we work with the municipality to figure out, okay, what's out there, what can we apply for, but we also have to go into the model that we're not going to receive that. So we have to also have basically a contingency plan for how we can move this forward, because I've seen too many times municipalities are waiting for a grant and they're hoping on that grant. A year from now, they're still having the same conversation because they either didn't get it or something got dragged on. And so I guess from that standpoint, it's the American Rescue Funds, this Infrastructure Job Act that's about to come out. I think municipalities being prepared for that and having all the data to where then they can apply quickly is going to be important. Now, me personally, I have a concern on how the money is going to be handled and dealt out. We've already seen that fail in the past. Corporations have gotten money and we're still doing this. Like, I tell this to a lot of people, we technically should not exist as a company. If the money that has been spent by the federal government to date was actually built to bridge the digital divide, we'd actually be doing all the stuff that this group wants to do. And from this side now, I want to partner with everybody on this group because we're the wireline, we're the fiber that gets the connectivity to there to where, gunshot recognition software, it only needs to be used when a gun's going off, but it always has to be available. Autonomous vehicles, you can't lose latency when it comes to that. So how do you apply all of that? And we have to work with each component, with each vertical, and then ultimately create a master plan that transforms the city.
Indeed, yeah. One thing that to follow up on that, and it came up during a meeting I had 2 weeks ago with Housing Authority. They were talking about what data can be used, and we're all a part of Cedar, so we can test, provide data, provide trusted data, whether it's for grants, funding, or other stakeholders. How have y'all seen your involvement in Cedar or things like it enhance those efforts?
Let me take a stab at that one. I mean, there's several proving grounds that we've seen in terms of technology evolution. One of the reasons we were so passionate about joining and getting involved in Cedar is there's the activity of integrating, really field-proven solution side aspects. A lot of the folks on this panel, kind of fit into that category where, it's about finding simpler ways, packages, and models. Most of the customers, I think that we're probably all going to see, are very much outcomes and solutions focused. The complexity that exists between our companies and between our solutions as an industry, we need to find a way to ferret that out. We need to find a way to make it simpler, make it more adoptable, and that I see as in one set of activities that happens in a variety of labs, within all of our own organizations and facilities. Cedar, on the other hand, I see as an opportunity to drive innovation. I see kind of the research and academic side of helping us tap into what's not in existence today. What is the art of the possible? What is the future going to look like? And have a variety of both research and technology partners come together to put those solutions into practice and really develop the use cases that will enhance the capabilities that we've already got today and be able to bring those into evolution, into commercialization in the near future.
Very nice. Anyone else want to take that?
The one thing that we work closely with is counties. We work really close with the county municipalities out there. We're working with, in our space also, in addition to the private LTE space, but say public safety. It's all about education, take it to another step. A lot of these folks across the country, they're not educated on what codes to enforce, things like that, which is unfortunate, and it does take something bad to happen for them to kind of open their eyes and say, hey, this code's been there and we haven't been enforcing it. So there, from a public safety perspective, first responders, things like that, there's organizations in place like the Safer Buildings Coalition. They're doing a good job of traveling the country and educating the counties and the AHJs, the authorities having jurisdiction on, what kind of infrastructure needs to be put in place. On outside as well, but also in building as well. So I think education is key with the counties, and then on the funding side, right? There's a lot of government funding programs that are out there right now that they could take advantage of. ESSER's Act, CARES Act. A lot of them don't know that there's billions of dollars in these funds, and they can use that. They can use that. So I think it's, Florida, right? They had their share of issues with school shootings and things like that in the past. Just to give you an idea, they've really cracked that code and drew that hard line in the sand as well. And public safety systems have been installed in, almost 1,000 schools just in the last 3 years, and we're starting to see Texas doing the same thing. Michigan just introduced a House bill, which is good, making sure that K through 12 is huge right now, that all K through 12 schools must have public safety compliance. So I think that goes right back to educating the counties, making sure that they're aware of what the code is, how to enforce it, and that they do have funds available.
Yeah, one note on that, and it's just through conversations we've had over the last year, education has been a big pull, whether that's through COVID or some of the funds coming down. How have y'all seen education be a pull for private LTE, LoRaWAN, or new technologies? How have you seen that? Or if so, maybe perhaps what other sectors or use cases are really pulling it that may not have been obvious when you started?
Yeah, I'll go for that if you want. From our side, we do work in some schools, but really I would say like the main driver for us is metering, which is easy use case. Money can be made immediately for the city, and whether it be gas, electric, water, whatever it may be, those are no-brainers. After given number of months after it's deployed, people can see that return on investment there. And like I said, schools, we don't do too much in schools right now.
Yeah, from a school perspective, we see a lot of opportunity for private LTE. Hospitals in that space right now, it's big. A lot of hospitals are, they have Wi-Fi, right? Wi-Fi is not going away; it's always going to be there. But I'll tell you, there's a lot of 4K video surveillance. There's a lot of applications that hospitals are using that Wi-Fi is just not robust enough. Not to mention, patient data is very, obviously it's critical. It's critical information. So from a security perspective, private LTE is definitely the way to go for these large hospitals. We're starting to see that trend. So they're planning not only for the wireless carrier coverage within the hospitals, but private LTE to really manage that property, manage that building, have access to these clinical apps.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific question. Our experience, and we deal with some very, very small communities as well. Community broadband is obviously one of the most critical end goals, if you will. And in that regard, particularly what I talk about, and I think Ryan, yourself, and Rob, what you bring to the table, what I call as the democratization of spectrum, right? Thin air, essentially. It's now being made available to communities that are beyond just the mobile operators. And that's a terrific gift to these communities. What we see, particularly applications such as FWA, fixed wireless access applications, you take your fiber or the backhaul up to a certain point, and then you beam into the communities. That's an incredibly fast way to deploy community broadband. And then then the world's your oyster as to whether it's a hospital, whether it's a school, what have you. And we're starting to see that in many, many communities. We have a very, very small, we have a customer in rural Tennessee. They were used to 2400 baud modems. Do you remember that? The screeching noise it used to make? And then they thought they got DSL, and they thought that was nirvana. And now they have, through fixed wireless access, the community has, and this particular small municipal utility, it's a multi-utility got electric, water, and community broadband.
Wow.
And the citizens or the community members are just over the moon.
So John mentioned private LTE a couple of years ago as being the thing that he thought would be ubiquitously adopted. What do you think, as someone who's providing the radios, has been either the limitation, or what do you think the next 5 years looks like for private LTE?
I think it depends on who you ask. Particularly for communities, everybody is going to start with LTE as the foundational block. But I know 5G is the sexy word, and people are talking about 6G and stuff like that. The challenge with 5G is the device ecosystem doesn't exist yet. It is evolving. I'm not saying it's never going to be there. It has to be there, right? But in certain cases, as you called out metering, for example, meters are not converted to 5G yet. So you would start to see limited use cases, LTE as the foundational block, and then it becomes a stepwise function. We see in the community broadband area 5G to be adopted sooner, I would say, rather than with heavy, large infrastructure industries such as utilities. Utilities is probably, we don't see 5G adoption at least in the next 3 to 4 to 5 years because of the massive amounts of investments they have to make. But in other areas, non-mission critical applications or use cases, I do see that foundational LTE gravitating to 5G relatively soon.
Very nice. Anyone else like to share?
Let me add a little bit to that, because I couldn't agree more with what Koustuv was saying. To me, what resonates is kind of the idea of foundational. As we build these core systems and we start to see them in place in the next 3 to 5 years, not entirely dissimilar to kind of the evolution that we saw with the internet. Who would have thought when we were connecting, some of the first devices together that now we'll be ordering cars through Uber, or getting phone or internet delivery for our meals, booking hotels, all the aspects of e-commerce. That took a real evolution of putting the digital landscape and the fabric together to be able to drive that innovation, and it opened the opportunity for the garage entrepreneur to really come to the table and be able to develop those kinds of ideas and opportunities. That's what excites me about where I see us going in terms of the evolution of the critical infrastructure and utility industry with these systems in place and the standards-based nature and what Koustuv just said. I mean, just remind everybody the E in LT means evolution. And utilities have never had that opportunity to build the digital communications foundation that they can now grow and evolve on for 10, 20, 30 years, up through 4G, 5G, 6G, and do it in a way that's comprehensive. That will open all kinds of opportunities for innovative small companies, many who I hope we see come to, the Cedar Labs, with new ideas, to adapt sensors and applications that can be confidently built on that digital foundation. That's what I think we're going to see. And, I think it's going to be an exciting place for the industry, just like it has been for us as consumers leveraging the internet.
Awesome. So maybe to think about what has been, we're talking about the future. So we've talked about adoption, which is the clear cut, is data-driven, cost-driven, and value-driven. But what has been something as we think about innovation over the next 5 years that gets you excited? Whether it's something you've seen on sci-fi or something that you see maybe in the lab that you can share that you think is that's the art of the possible. Happy? Yeah.
I'll take it if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So, so again, where we operate is sort of either in a city for doing very low bandwidth type of devices. And what we've seen out there recently is in terms of forest fires and detection of fires as quickly as possible, because those are hugely expensive events that occur and very deadly as well. And we've seen different types of devices out there that allow us to, number one, reach out and be able to access that device with our connectivity, but also that they're low cost enough so that in a national park or even a city park or some sort of city green area, they have the ability to for really very, very low cost, put fire detection out there and have a system to where they can, not immediately, but very quickly determine where a fire is taking place. And this is, it sort of goes on to when we're talking about the utilities and their power lines and when they have events that cause fires due to winds or whatever they may be. But for us, I think some of these health and public safety things that can use these IoT networks out there show huge promise.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to add, we're headquartered in California, so if you can kind of speed it up a little bit with the utilities out there, we're seeing a lot of issues with fires out there, and unfortunately, a lot of them are have been caused, with some kind of a connection to the utility. But what keeps me kind of excited about where this is going is seeing converged networks out there. We're seeing, some early adopters. We're seeing a lot of the big developers and property owners that are a little bit more open-minded. So 5G, private LTE, they all have these strategies, and that's really exciting to me. So there's a big government campus in Colorado, National Renewable Energy Labs. That's, I don't know how many buildings, it's 30 buildings. It's a big, giant, sprawling campus. First and foremost, they put cellular. They put our equipment in there for cellular for all the buildings. Now it's kind of interesting that they ask the questions. Well, what about private LTE? So to hear even government properties like that, kind of that encouraged me to see that they're future focused on 5G, but also on private LTE and what they can do with it, and they can do a lot with private LTE. So we're excited about that.
I got one I'll add, John. Going the other way, kind of when I think about the communication systems, I realize about building the plumbing. The purpose for that plumbing, though, is to be able to allow the seamless transition of the data, the information behind it. There's some amazing innovation coming our way, kind of beyond what a human does with that information to about how we automate, the information collection and decision-making factor, whether it's through AI or machine learning. Those kinds of capabilities, with the applications, across the sector, I think are phenomenal. The complexity I'll come back to as I describe the future state of the grid is one that I don't personally believe, kind of the human is going to be capable, of digesting and making decision at the level of, regularity that we're going to see, and it's going to take more advancements in terms of what we do to be able to automate as much of that capability as possible. But there's some fascinating examples out there, One of the real cool ones I saw was, using some augmented reality to, help train the next generation workforce, to be able to bring, in the utility space, we have a relatively aging workforce. And, a lot of the knowledge capture over the last several decades is something we're really struggling with in terms of how do we not just keep up with the turnover, but be able to retrain and retool kind of the next generation of workforce as we start talking about a digital future for the grid. And some of that capability around bringing intelligence and the decades of experiences, right to a virtual reality experience for a modern workforce is phenomenal. And I think it's an exciting future direction for where we can see the application in industrials.
Yeah,
I would add to it, for example, what is exciting and whether it's private networks or public networks doesn't matter, what the pervasiveness of the network, what it is doing to us is this whole concept of digital twins, right? Mm-hmm. As you take the sensory fabric down to the lowest common denominator, to access that data, to process that data right then and there is a thing of beauty, because that was very, very expensive to do before. Because every time you pull data from the edge, you've got to pay somebody. It's ka-ching for somebody to process that. Now within your own private network ecosystem, it's your own network. You don't have to pay anybody for that, right? And we have seen real cases in one of the cities in California, speaking of which, where the entire firefighter has a digital twin, and the crew that is outside, when a firefighter goes in, including, intense fire, you're not seeing anything through your own eyes. It's a digital vision. You literally have recreated that, and you're seeing it in front of your eyes within your glass. What's going on inside. Wow. It's an incredible, I think it's in the public domain.
Yeah, I think you bring up digital twins, and whether we could either steer to the metaverse or edge compute, happy to do either. But I do know that as we look at the evolution of networks and compute power being at the edge, we've seen a one-way street from the data center outward, and then now you're seeing a two-way communication. So because bandwidth is cost curve is down, compute cost curve is going down, as well as GPU cost curve is going down. What excites you with that inflection point? Or maybe perhaps what's an interesting statistic that maybe you know that the people don't know that helps you project the future? So for us personally, I think about edge compute all the time because it's similar to what you mentioned. As compute chips, whether it's GPUs out at the towers, at the homes, or even at the device level, you start seeing new real-time information happen, whether that's for content, and you can actually transform the consumer experience. At least in our experience, we have a super majority of residential clients, but that also allows us to take what's typically an enterprise use case and then provide it to residences. So whether that's cybersecurity, I'm curious to see what other trends that y'all are tracking that may be adjacent to what you're working on.
Yeah, I was going to go where you're going, John. To me, it's an opportunity to scale. As I start thinking kind of just the raw economics start coming down, and I see kind of edge compute as being enabled to not just enhance capabilities, but further optimize the cost side. Let's face it, particularly with the primary audience that we're on with regulated utilities, the cost of these systems in some way, if it's not for subsidy, passes down to us as ratepayers. That's just how it works. And the ability to do more from a perspective of technology programs, put more better solutions, in play faster, and not pass, those costs on to consumers, which means make it more affordable, drive synergies across programs, finds opportunities, like Koustuv said, to not just service the interests of the utilities, but other constituents that can take advantage of that economic opportunity, I think are very exciting. And, I think the more that we drive adoption of all of these kind of standards-based solutions and technologies down, storage is a prime example of that. I think you're continuing to find a better economic model for it, more competition, more opportunity, and more stakeholders, which makes it better for all the people who benefit.
Excellent. Maybe this is a question for Brian. What have you seen over the last few years that has made open access more accessible in the US, whereas it was something that was typically in other countries and newly adopted here?
The easiest way to answer it was different. And I still don't think open access the way, I guess the way you define open access, everybody usually thinks you're going to be able to select multiple ISPs. Everybody talks about competition until they're connected to a direct fiber network at good pricing. I mean, then everything changes. And I just see an evolution of because it's just like what we were talking about, the edge equipment within the house, the wireless that we're going to be able to build within the house, within a business. It's not like we are creating what we call like our lit marketplace, where yeah, you'll have your internet, but we also want the consumer to be able to select different telehealth providers. We want them to be able to select different security systems. So they go to their account and it's more of we call it open application networks from that standpoint on. So how and it also includes education on those applications too. And it goes back to like greenfield developments and things like that. It's finally, I think I've kind of beat my head for years trying to explain to greenfield developments, you have the opportunity to set up a smart home before people even walk into it. And you have the ability to educate them on that. And it's finally happening. And that's a cool part to see. And also, I think what's going to be, and we're talking about what was exciting is, we're starting to see cities, because every city is different in what they're going to do that you quote unquote smart. I don't think you can define smart city and say this is what you do for a smart city. What Austin does, what Brownsville does, what Lampasas, Texas does is all going to be different what they consider smart. Like we're working with the lake community up in Medina, Ohio, where we're doing smart boat ramps. And that's what they need because it's a retirement lake community. And from that standpoint, I need it too because I can't park a boat very well. So if they could automate that to park, that'd be great. Where in other cities, main part of the cities, it's smart traffic signals it's smart street lights. It's different needs for whatever city, and they need to figure that out. So I think I see an evolution of open access is going to work in certain areas. Utopia and other areas are a great success based on that. But again, I question more of how many people would actually switch ISPs to more they want an ISP that's also going to provide them additional services.
Perhaps from a supply side, and this is a question both that connects to open access, but also I guess the rest. Are there missing pieces in the vendor ecosystem you see, whether that's operating and management, integrators, et cetera, or even just the ISPs that would ride the open access network? Have y'all seen any limitations or things that you'd like to foster over the next few years?
Yeah, actually, several years ago, that was very relevant. It was, if you took a look at the integrators out there, few and far between. You had two chucks in a truck, we'll call them, going on site, trying to, future-proof these properties and developments and smart city applications as well. But now, take a look at the ecosystem. It's getting more and more robust every day. I don't want to keep going back, but I will. Anterix, take a look at Anterix. Their ecosystem, 3 years ago looked a lot different than it is today. You take a look at the logos that are working with them. IoT, the IoT manufacturers out there, the devices are, every day there's new devices, made for it. So I think the ecosystem is getting stronger and stronger every single day.
Very nice.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'd say the biggest area to work on, though, is the integration of this data to get it to the city to what they want to do with it, or to get it to the end user to what they want to do with it. There's big companies, SAS is an example out there, and some of the others that if you fund them with enough money, you'll get something that works. But I think if it could be easier to where maybe an integrator with the city, maybe that these projects can be brought on with less overhead in terms of manpower and expense to do the integration. I think getting that data, that last step to where someone or something can make a decision on it, right? It's when a flooding event occurs, you don't want someone manually looking at a screen full of flood gauges. You want a marker to come up saying this area is an alert and we're going to do this about it. You want that done in an automated way.
Got it. From y'all's perspective, y'all have a very high level, whether it's with UBA or other affiliations, what have y'all seen in the ecosystem that you've seen evolve over the last few years from a vendor perspective, or what needs maybe need to be filled over the next few years?
We certainly see, I think you alluded to the ecosystem, the device ecosystem, if you will, or the endpoint ecosystem. I mean, we can build all the images of digital twins, but if there isn't a sensor to get that data, there is no twin being built, right?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I mean, we've seen, I think compared to what John was saying too, just an explosion of interest and I think recognition too that we're in a very collaborative space right now in a good way. That the solutions we're building, are complex. There's multiple components and pieces of expertise necessary to be able to pull them together in the most efficient way. I'm going to go slightly one step further when John was going, in terms of the role of the integrator. I think we need to focus more on integrated, meaning, that we're pre-establishing the right packages and the solutions to make them easier to consume. I find too often, historically, what I've seen in the space is we kind of make integration, a workspace activity, where we're doing project activities around large, complex implementations, and that doesn't streamline the adoption cycle, by being able to think more creatively not just how the companies work together cooperatively like they do in the ecosystem, put more eloquent solutions together that help makes adoption easier, less risky, and faster, will be a necessary next step. And I anticipate we're going to see it as the pieces come together.
I realize we're running out of time, but I did want to open it up for one or two questions from the audience, if maybe one at least, if there is one.
And we have time and a mic. So if you raise your hand, I'm going to run, give you the mic, ask you to introduce yourself. That's why I'm wearing sneakers.
Thanks, everybody, for being here today. Once again, I want to ask Brian, if Brian could maybe help us. He has a great vision of what the world should be. And I want him to take the Brownsville project and imagine for a moment, go into a Jetsons 30-second view of how do you take and replicate this in 10 more cities, and what does that mean? What is that going to do to society?
Yeah, and we're already seeing it start to replicate because we've started it in, as I said, our first market was Medina County, Ohio, and they already had a middle mile network that was built to where we could provide connectivity within the cities. And Brownsville was ranked the worst connected city with a population over 100,000 people for, I think, 3 of the past 6 years. And the other years they've been towards the top. So the first part of the step towards getting this is we've got to build better infrastructure throughout the city. But like I was saying before, the partnership and the P3 of the municipality controlling their backbone within their city, connecting their anchor institutes, connecting their fire department, their police stations, anything that is going to require emergency services in the future, Brownsville is going to benefit from that completely. And the great thing is they have the funds to do it through ARPA funding. But kudos to Brownsville. Again, we went through a plan with them. We wrote a business plan for them. And they went forward to building a middle mile network that will go all across the city, and they're using $20 million in ARPA funds. Our company is bringing in $70 million of private funds where we're going to set up a local branded ISP. Everything is going to be trained local. So we're going to train local staff to where they're not leaving the city to go to other connectivity. But we also have to train them on, they're going to have to, it's not, their jobs aren't going away. They have to learn how to do their jobs differently. And we're going to have to be able to support them along that way. So it's education and building out in parallel to where we need to be talking about wireless connectivity in parallel as we're doing it too. So I think we're going to change municipalities from so many different levels when you look at it as an economic driver than just I'm building a fiber network to the home. You're telling a story about how somebody can go from, we're thinking about working with companies like Connect Humanity and PC for People to where, low income family, we have the ACP program set up, but they need a computer. Okay, now they got a computer. They've never had a checking account. So we will set up programs to train them how to do that, and then after they pass that, then they have the ability to do it, because the end goal needs to be to get them out of low income. And we're going to find the ones that want that, and we're going to work with them all the way through. So this is a lot of moving parts. And I will say, when I was first describing the big vision of everything, it was really hard to raise money. Because I think it was bigger back then, because you got to think this was before COVID when I was bringing this up to communities and things like that. And the understanding didn't happen, but COVID then accelerated everything. So right now, Andres, to also answer your question, we're working with probably 10 different communities across the country right now through our first process, and pretty much all of them are going to be moving forward in the same direction. And they have the ability to do that. That's the cool part.
Thank you, Brian. More questions?
Bring it on.
That's what I'm
We got one in the back, right here, in the left corner.
I can run.
I'm Christopher Ortega. I was interested earlier when you spoke about, the things like apartment complexes and being able to see things that are happening, on the property and doing things like that, and kind of those IoT applications, and kind of to build on what you were just talking about with the smart cities over here, with the, with the fiber connections over here, is not only are you connecting these communities now, but there's also small industries and businesses, not just apartment complexes, but, whether it be agri-science or, precision agriculture applications, also maybe like some of these smaller economies have maybe factories that only have a couple of hundred employees and things like that, where they do assemblies and stuff like that. I guess I'd like to hear more about not just apartment complexes and consumer grade type access, but also a little bit more about that industry level IoT application.
Yeah, we're starting to see that, obviously, from a factory perspective. A lot of the factories that you mentioned that have smaller factories, 200 employees, et cetera, they're kind of following suit on what the big boys are doing. Like, I won't mention the name, but the largest online retailer in the world is headquartered in the Pacific Northwest. They have these fulfillment centers going up everywhere, right? I think the smallest one is 2 million square feet that we've seen. We've seen them up to 5.5 million square feet, and they're building 200 of these every 18 months across the country. And so they're taking advantage of the technologies from an automation perspective, remote control perspective. So there's a lot of tools that they're using, and we're starting to see the smaller shops doing the same thing. They're following suit. So they're planning up front, right? They're planning up front not just for to have the typical infrastructure installed, but obviously from a wireless perspective, they're making sure that enough fiber is pulled. And they're not even for today. They're pulling enough fiber for future proofing that building as well. So the good news is we're seeing a lot of the smaller manufacturing plants kind of follow suit with what the big ones are doing.
Thank you. Are there more questions? I kind of thought I saw a hand.
While y'all come up with questions, I will also add to that, because for us, as an ISP, we're technology agnostic, but predominantly work in fixed wireless. And we always say spectrum doesn't differentiate across the geography, whether that's for residences, enterprises, large and small. And so what we've seen is smaller OEMs and manufacturers want to digitize, but they also need a helping hand. So that means digitizing some of their systems, their cloud storage, and then security. What application do I use if I'm an OEM for something that's highly secure? And they might just be a 5-person shop. And so those are the kinds of, we almost call them home enterprises. They are sophisticated in some ways, but they do need almost a dedicated IT staff or support team to help them move up the curve of complexity.
So I have two questions. So, and after this question, I'll keep the mic. So, Ryan, tell us, utilities have been trying for a long time we had a great keynote and interview, but tell us what's happening right now without spilling the beans in much so say, but utilities have been on this fence of wanting to build this smart grid of the future for a long time. And it's not happening because things have been missing. And regulatory is one of them, right? But now that the spectrum that you guys offered to the marketplace with the infrastructure from Ericsson to make it real is almost there. Tell us, push out the envelope 5 years from now, Amarin, who's licensed this? What are they going to be doing 5 years from now that they cannot do today? And maybe you and Gustav can back and forth add to this.
Yeah, happy to. Koustuv's cover got some great color too, but it's the right question, Andres. I mean, there's no denying. I think utilities have been speaking and developing their ambitions for, and it's frankly fallen under several monikers over the last couple decades. But grid transformation or smart grid, it was smart metering before that. And I'll say it's kind of played out in phases from my perspective. I'll say honestly and frankly, I think the first piece was there was missing aspects of the toolkit. I think really as an industry we're struggling, with having access to the right type of technology to solve the right scope of problems that we were facing. And the Ameren example that we've highlighted, I think, is a fascinating story of what happened as an evolution. The fact that after a couple decades of building out point solutions for those systems, that you could end up as an operating company with 20, more than 20 disparate wireless networks is phenomenal to me. That you don't really, I think, reflect on and think about until after the fact that you get there. Because I've been in the industry that long, I'm sure it made sense, with every one of the incremental investments that we made that ultimately got us there. And it's not unique to Ameren. I think that's the scary thing about that. We see that kind of a diverse networking ecosystem out there and across a lot of the solutions of utilities. So what was missing, though, Andres, from a toolkit perspective, was a standards-based, holistic broadband network. That's really the differentiator, and why we couldn't do that for the public utilities was we had no spectrum to build it on. And you have to have the wireless airwaves to build modern networks. And utilities and most private infrastructure have struggled to find access to one of the most critical resources that we have as a nation. It's been gobbled up by the large carriers who have every monetizable interest to be able to do that and pay huge amounts of sums to be able to get access to it. And it took an innovative mind, as we're going to hear later today from Morgan O'Brien, to be able to help find and unlock that opportunity and make it available for utilities, where we've tried as an industry. Believe me, I've been involved in several activities where we were trying to find access to spectrum to build modern networks, and we struggled and failed. And I think that's what's really opened up the toolkit side of things. I think now we're into a different set of problems. When you start thinking about the application of a holistic broadband network, it changes the dynamic of ways utilities think, the way regulators regulate, and setting a new norm for what is a prudent investment. If something like broadband bends the minds of some in the space, where point solutions have been the king, and being able to identify a positive business case for a replacement technology strategy has really dominated the landscape for the last several decades, and we need to start thinking about it differently. And I think we're seeing that, though, honestly, Andres. I think we're seeing utilities start to come around. We're investing significant amounts of our time, as I know is the ecosystem, driving education for our state regulators and our decision makers to try to help influence and drive awareness on what modern communications means and how to best incentivize the build out of a modern grid. And I think you're seeing some of that actually roll down now in the BIL, certainly in the IR Act. There's aspects that I think are more consistent with the direction that we're going to find utilities going, from now forward.
Excellent. And Gustav, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe we close out with this. What is most exciting is you had FCC. All they cared about was the telecom sector. You had FERC, NERC. All they cared about was the power sector. I have never seen the two come together till now. And the communications, this revolution that is going on in the world of communications, as Ryan pointed out, ubiquitous, standards-based communications, 3GPP networks, as we like to call it, right? I've never seen, I personally was in that meeting where FCC and FERC sitting in the same room. I told an audience at DistribuTech 10 years ago, I'll never see it in my lifetime. It is happening now, because both industries have realized the interdependency of each other. And I think that's the best thing that can happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. For my second question was for Tim, and maybe to help the others. But Tim, if I'm a utility or a city, is it just fiber? Is it LoRaWAN? Is it private LTE? Or how does it all work together?
Yeah, It's all of it. At the end of the day, it's all these technologies are used. There's, take these gunshot detectors that we're talking about. Those aren't something that would typically go on LoRaWAN. There's probably some edge processing going on, and they have certain requirements of probably how fast they need to get that data back. But if you're just reading meters, if you're turning on street lights, if you're checking if someone's in a parking spot, that's perfect for LoRaWAN. So we see all of the technologies being used together, and it's really just a cost versus all the other, fundamental items that'll go into that. I mean, as an example, a street light is not necessarily a critical thing. It can save the city a ton of money by digitizing these street lights and controlling them, changing the luminosity of them, which probably wouldn't be suited for 5G. There's some cost there when it's 5G where LoRa has a little bit lesser cost. But in terms of infrastructure for charging networks and self-driving cars, automated items like that, that absolutely would not work on LoRa. So that's where 5G and LTE are absolutely needed. So
and they both need fiber.
They all do, yes. All of even our equipment hooks up on the towers to some sort of fiber or wireless backhaul. That's right.
So it's a happy kumbaya.
Pardon?
It's a happy kumbaya.
That's right. Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah. Yep.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Was that a stretch or a hand? Okay. If there are no more questions here in the big group, then I would like to open this up for 15 minutes for you guys to mingle now. Continue conversations, grab one of the panelists in order to have a conversation. One more round of applause as a thank you to our panelists. We appreciate
everyone.
you. Thank you.
If I may, my ask is I want a selfie with this guy.
There you go. If you want a selfie too, go ahead, join. Otherwise, lunch will be served over there in 15 minutes.